Thanks, Allison, for putting a note in there. Yes, there are currently 112 of you in the room. You're welcome to put in your location, time, and temperature. Anything else? We're about 2 minutes away from starting. Dr. Albrecht is here and he's ready. I'm going to be quiet until the beginning, but we'll get going in a minute or two. Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to another Library 2.0 webinar with Dr. Steve Albrecht, Domestic Violence in the Library, a safety and security issue facing patrons and staff. We've had about 1,100 of you sign up for this event. We're super delighted that you're here or watching the recording, and welcome, Dr. Steve.
Thanks, Steve Hargadon. We talk a lot at Library 2.0 in the almost 10 years that Steve Hargadon and I have been working together, and I value his friendship and support because oftentimes he has wisdom in areas when we talk about what to do and how to do it. So when I proposed this session to him, one of our initial conversations was, should we do it for free? I mean, we're all in the business to make money, and we enjoy, charging for webinars like any other training company. But the answer for both of us obviously was yes, let's do this as a free program. I did a program this year on pepper spray for library staff in terms of security, and that was about as many people signed up for that as this one, which I was really pleased about. We did a version of the Safe Library. When my book came out in 23, we did a version for all staff and leaders about what a safe library is, and that's a free program as well. So there are many times throughout the year where a certain subject just resonates with us, and this is one of them. And I'm really glad that you're here. This concept of domestic violence has been a part of my adult life as a first responder since I was 21 years old. I'll tell you my story and how I got to where we are. The slides that you see in front of you that Steve will put up on the Library 2.0 website next week are kind of a roadmap for you, a guide, a roadmap to how to respond to this issue. I really have divided it twice in this program into either the staff domestic violence issues for library employees and then also for patrons. And the patrons piece comes in interesting ways. Some of it is through child custody drop-off in the library parking lot or child custody issues inside the library, which I've seen cause some conflict and emotional stress for everybody. The perpetrator sometimes comes in quite upset about the whole concept and makes things difficult for everybody. The other part is staff will encounter library patrons who they know, at least professionally, but a little personally as well, about some of the issues in their private life where they may be reaching out for help. And the other part of that is how we do it safely for everybody, not to make the situation worse for the patron. And so the staff side is also, when you look at domestic violence as a particularly female problem and concern. Their safety is 85% of the domestic violence victims are typically female. I get that transgender people are assaulted, and I get that men are assaulted as well. But in my experience, the large majority is women. And when we talk about that, I'm cognizant of the other targeted violence areas there, but I'm going to focus on this is particularly a female problem. When we look at this subject in my own experience, it came from my background and also my work in workplace violence. And for some of you who don't know me, that's how I got started in library work. I'm a workplace violence professional first and foremost, and I evolved 20 years ago into helping libraries. So four key issues here: understanding domestic violence concerns, looking at how we help staff who are dealing with the issue with patrons, or how we help library leaders, HR professionals, and other staff members support their coworkers who may be dealing with the issue as well. We have a strong sense of private life versus public life in employment. You have a right to a private life, but sometimes, unfortunately, these situations intrude onto the library facility and make other people afraid, including the staff member who's dealing with it and her coworkers. Third, some response protocols. One of the things I'm going to talk about early in this discussion is some resources. And sometimes those get put at the back end, and then because I fall in love with the sound of my own voice, we rush through them. So I want to cover those resources early. And one of the resources that I look at is what state laws have done in the United States. And there are 25 states that have or would be defined as either protected class status for domestic violence employees, right, or reasonable accommodation categories there. So 25 states means 25 states do not. And in California, where I came from, where I lived most of my life, and San Diego, is Senate Bill 400 says not only do we protect employees who reveal domestic violence concerns to us as a protected class, meaning they cannot be fired. It's like age, race, gender, sexual orientation, military status, pregnancy, et cetera. It is a protected class. And then the second part of Senate Bill 400, which is even more important, is we must develop a safety plan for the employee at work. And that means, what do we do to keep this person safe? And in the library world, that means transferring them, putting them in a new branch, letting them work remotely at home, letting them work at another city location or county location if it's possible, bringing in private security, notifying law enforcement, giving access to employee assistance program or other trauma counselors or domestic violence advocacy groups. Fourth one, self-care. How do we have staff take care of themselves with the stress of these situations? And they're highly stressful. Ground rules down to bottom there. This is obviously a difficult topic. Some of you have this in your background, or it has been in your family. People you care and love have been victims of domestic violence or even perpetrators of domestic violence. It seems to touch a lot of families. Your dating relationships may have had these things. So I don't tell any horrific stories, no photos or videos that are designed to make people feel bad about the subject. I would just talk about how I came to it and my work in it and how I continue to work in this area. And so I ask for your support as I talk about this difficult issue for everybody, and I'm going to do it in a way which I hope is empathic and empowering for everybody as well. So a couple of things jump to mind when I consider this concept. This Margaret Drabble quote is quite well known, and for men, it's a puzzler to them. They scratch their heads. What? How could this be? A man's greatest fear from a woman is that she will laugh at him. A woman's greatest fear is that a man will kill her. And men look at this like, what is she talking about? How could that be? So I'm not a killer. I don't harm people. But women's perspective, and I've been teaching safety and security and modeling this safe workplace, the safe library for over 20 years, 25 years. And what I think about as I walk from the shopping mall at 9 o'clock at night back to my car is different than any other woman thinks about. I would include my wife and my daughter. My daughter's 32 years old, and their perception is different. And so I have the concept of women's perception of some men as being dangerous as valid and intuitive to them. You can see that phrase there, encountering a man versus a bear in the woods. This is one of those memes that seemed to make the rounds in days of old last year, that, what would a woman want to encounter alone in the woods, a bear or a man? And the answer every time for the woman was the bear. And so men a lot of times don't get things like that. They don't understand fear. They don't understand safety and security. They don't understand the risk of sexual assault. They don't understand the risk of sexual harassment that women encounter from age 12 forward. Look at that phrase at the top. If I can't have you, nobody else can. Every woman over the age of 12 can fill in that second part. If I can't have you, nobody else can. Those guys are wicked dangerous. When I worked in workplace violence prevention in the beginning, we worked around a concept in a group that I belonged to called ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. ATAP was founded by LAPD in the 90s, early 90s. I've been a member of them for about 30 years. We have conferences twice a year where we talk about workplace violence, school violence, domestic violence in the workplace, and stalking as characteristics that we need to address as a body of security, law enforcement, mental health professionals to stop these things. And so we came up with a concept called hunters versus howlers. Howlers are people that make threats. And I'm going to blow up the building and I'm going to come in and do this, and this, but they don't do anything. Hunters are people who don't make any threats. They tell a third party not to target, but they come in and harm people. I have used this model, howlers and hunters, my entire career in workplace violence prevention. However, there's an exception. In domestic violence, if I can't have you, nobody else can. Those are howlers. They make threats to the target and they carry them out. They're howlers who hunt. Look at this characteristic. There are more animal shelters in the United States than domestic violence shelters. If that doesn't give us pause, if that doesn't tell us that we need to devote different and more and better resources to this issue, I don't know what will. And the last one, someone you work with or serve as a patron, work with as a coworker, may be experiencing domestic violence right now, and have tried desperately to keep the situation separate from their personal life coming over to work or coming into the library facility, and sometimes they just can't help it. It arrives. And so I always say the same thing in training, and people get it. I say, when do we discover one of our employees or even a patron has a domestic violence restraining order against somebody? And the answer is when he walks in the room and threatens her, when he walks into the building, and that's when we discover it. And as employees and coworkers, we want to know about these things. And I'm going to address it with you specifically. I'm going to give you specific policy language to include library leaders into your policy manual about how we address this issue from an HR perspective and a safety perspective. But for patrons who bring the domestic violence perpetrator into the room with them because they share custody or they're in the process of breaking up or this person has followed her there, these are dynamic, stressful, threatening situations, sometimes even 911 situations. So let's move forward. So let me give you a quick background on me so you get where I come from. In 1994, I co-wrote the first business book on workplace violence called Ticking Bombs. It was Michael Mantell, who was the police psychologist in San Diego, and he was Oprah's Dr. Phil, and we wrote this book together. In the Ticking Bombs book, I interviewed a double murderer in prison, a guy named Robert Mack, who killed two people in the workplace in 1992. I have subsequently, in my other books, interviewed two other workplace violence murderers, including a guy that killed 8 people at his ex-wife's beauty salon in California, a place called Seal Beach, a guy named Scott DeCry, one of the most charming sociopaths I've ever met in my entire career, and I've met a few. So you can see my books are really oriented around workplace violence and crisis management and workplace safety. And then I evolved in 2015 to the library when I wrote the ALA book, Library Security. And then I wrote in 2023 the book for Rowman and Littlefield, The Safe Library. I've subsequently done two other books for Rowman and Littlefield, The Library Leader's Guide to Human Resources. I addressed that issue in this book. In that book, and then also the Library Leader's Guide to Employee Coaching, where I addressed special coaching situations which may involve domestic violence involving a library employee. So I've been thinking about this issue for a really long time, and here's why. When I was 15, I got robbed. I worked at a grocery store in San Diego, about 4 blocks from my parents' house. And 2 guys with guns came in and grabbed me and my partner, and they threw us on the ground. And the guy put a gun to the back of my head and said, "Give me the keys to the safe," which I did. I was 15 years old in 1978. And I said, if I survive this, I'm going to go be a cop. And that's what I did. And in 1984, I went into the police department in San Diego. And in that time, some pretty rough things happened. We lost cops to being murdered. We lost people in the biggest workplace violence situation in the United States in McDonald's at a San Ysidro McDonald's in 1984. So I worked my career there in patrol. And in 1993, just before the workplace violence book, the Ticking Bombs book came out, I went over to the domestic violence unit. And you can see Misty Cedron there, one of our lieutenants, who is the domestic violence unit coordinator in San Diego for the PD. That unit in 1993 was founded by a woman named Ann Odell. She was one of our sergeants, and Ann Odell is very well known, O apostrophe D-E-L-L. Ann O'Dell is very well known in the domestic violence community as being an advocate for women's issues and support of the police change of response to domestic violence. So from 84 to 93, I worked in patrol. But from 93 to 99, I worked as an investigator in the DV unit, and I handled 1,500 cases in that time span. 1,500, mostly misdemeanors, but 1,500 cases in that time span. In law enforcement, back in those days, we had a model which changed our approach and was called the Duluth model, as in Duluth, Minnesota. The Duluth model said law enforcement will arrest people, male and female, but typically men, who have engaged in domestic violence behavior like grabbing somebody and leaving bruising or threatening to harm somebody. Those people will go to jail. Because in the old days, we didn't do it that way, and it was wrong, and it was a failure. In the old days, we would say, well, go sleep it off with your sisters, and you stay here with the kids, and we'll make sure he leaves. And that's how people got killed. And also, not only was it how people got killed, but also the problem didn't get solved because there were no consequences to the behavior. And the other thing we learned from the social scientists and the child family experts is when we arrest dad for hitting mom in front of their child, the message to that child is this is not right. Because what we used to do is let's take him out back and handcuff him and put him in the cop car and don't tell little Johnny because we don't want little Johnny to see dad in peril like this. And that was stupid. What we said was, this is wrong, little Johnny, and dad's going to jail because he's not supposed to hit your mom. And that was the Duluth model. So the Duluth model changed our approach. And in the early parts of the late 80s, that's when the Duluth model came to law enforcement. And I'm proud to say in my department in San Diego, where my wife was a sex crime detective and my father-in-law was the assistant chief and my brother-in-law worked there as a cop, that's what we do. We put people in jail for domestic violence. So one more story here. Look at the photo or the little description there, the outline of the state of Nevada. And so when I was a brand new consultant for workplace violence, I was going around the country teaching all kinds of public and private sector organizations about this issue of workplace violence. And in those days, it was really kind of the post office. But for me, it kind of, I was seeing it as happening other places, and I knew it wasn't just a post office issue. So in the late 90s, when I was still a cop, I went to Nevada, to Las Vegas, and I did a program for a credit union there. And so we had all the senior people there, the credit union managers and vice presidents and things like that. And so I did 2 hours in the morning with them on workplace violence, this new concept of workplace violence and how organizations need to start preparing for it with policy and how we treat employees and security procedures and whatnot. So I did the morning session and we went to lunch. I went to lunch with the senior executives for this credit union. We came back from lunch and I was setting up for the afternoon session and she came in and said, one of the senior folks came in and said, we have to cancel. And I said, why? How bad was it? Did I say something or do something that was wrong? She said, no. One of our tellers went to lunch with her ex-boyfriend. They were trying to reconcile and that apparently didn't work. He walked her back into the branch, shot and killed her and shot and killed himself on that exact morning. That situation happened. So, I mean, that made such an imprint on me in terms of my response to this issue, not only having worked 1,500 cases for the PD, but also just looking at it in the terms of the totality and go, we have a long way to go for this issue in the United States. And I've been working in that area in counseling and coaching and supporting library leaders when they bring that issue to my attention and been teaching about it in training programs for 25 years. So let's talk about some resources. These are some of the finest people I know in the domestic violence world. One is Casey Gwinn. He was the former city attorney for the city of San Diego. And his colleague at the place called the Alliance for Hope is Gail Strack. Gail Strack was an assistant city attorney that worked for Casey. They've been colleagues for 30 years. Casey, I think, is just getting to retire or will soon retire from the Alliance for Hope. And that's based in San Diego. And they have also, Gail and Casey have done something miraculous, which is they have created over 150 family justice centers in the United States. And I'll talk about what that is in a second. The other thing that Casey and Gail did was they created something for cops and first responders, medical people, ambulance people, social workers, domestic violence advocates, called the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. And the reason that's so important is domestic violence victims who are strangled by their partners have a higher risk of death than any other warning sign about domestic violence that exists. I'll say it again. Victims who are strangled by their, not strangled to death, but strangled as an injured by their perpetrators, that is the leading indicator of future homicide. So let's talk about this family justice piece here. San Diego was the first city that created a family justice center. And the value to the family justice center was what it was called vertical prosecution. So we put all of the family law, family crimes people in one building, offsite from the PD, offsite from the prosecutor's office, from the city attorney and the DA. So this is domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse, detectives, social workers, forensic people, medical forensic people, and prosecutors for child abuse, domestic violence, and elder abuse, all in one building. So they created this concept of vertical prosecution back in 2002, so 23 years ago. Gail and Casey have helped found 150 family justice centers in the United States. That is incredible and impressive. So one of your missions in this discussion here is to find out if a family justice center exists in your city, and sometimes they do. This is a concept that says these people, these victims, these kids, these adults, these seniors, these cases will not hopefully fall through the cracks because we have everybody who is highly trained and focused on these issues, elder abuse, child abuse, and domestic violence, to stop this problem. And so we will aim as many resources as prosecutors, cops, detectives, forensic people, medical people, therapists, social workers to the issue. Second thing, last thing at the bottom there. I talked briefly about Senate Bill 400 in California, which makes being a domestic violence victim a protected class in that state, meaning you cannot be fired for being a DV victim as an employee. But if you look at it, you say only 25 states. Why is this not all 50? It's still staggering to me. This is not true. Only 25 states have that. Research in your state if you are one of the 25 states that has protected status class for your employees. Okay, so let's talk about this Strangulation Institute. Several of my law enforcement colleagues, my partners in various detective units and things, have gone to this program, and it's stunning. I mean, it is just so powerful to sit through this, and I think it's about a 4-day program that they teach around the country, and they have an online version as well. So inside the Casey and Gail's institute, the one I talked about here, which is the Alliance for Hope, is this Strangulation Prevention Training Institute. And they talk about these stats here. Look at the bottom there. Odds for homicide increased 750% for victims who have already been previously strangled compared to victims who have not. And this is a download, a PDF from their training programs, which you can get online. So take a look at their concept here, this Training Institute for Strangulation Prevention. If you want to know the biggest predictor of death in a woman is this strangulation, and it is stunning when you look at the stats and the discussion they have about this. Look at that one down at the bottom from Officer Safety for Cops. Majority of all police, on the bottom right there, all police officers killed in line of duty are killed by men who have strangled women. I mean, that's stunning. It is just stunning. So one of the people that I worked with in San Diego PD was a sergeant named Joanne Archambault. Joanne has recently retired, but she founded a group called IVAWA, which is the End Violence Against Women International. And IVAWA is an offshoot of a federal program which still exists today, which is called the Violence Against Women Act, or the VAWA Act. That helped with federal restraining orders, prosecution, and things like that. So if you go to evawintl.org, you'll see that End Violence Against Women International is another fine resource. They do national conferences, which I've spoke at a couple times before. They're based in by Seattle. Really, really good folks. And End Violence Against Women International, EVAWINTL. And this will be on the slides if you want to download these after our program. So if you look at this and you say, why libraries and why this discussion, the biggest issue is access. And so people see the library as a place of refuge. It's a place of support, a place of peace, a place they can go and not be suspected of looking for information about domestic violence resources, which they could not do on their phone or at home on their computer. We can provide support and information and resources, posters in the restrooms, brochures that we can leave at the circulation desks that people can get surreptitiously and used for their own safety. And this is significant. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is domestic violence related policy. And this is a sample. And again, it's in the slides. But I wrote this as a kind of catch-all for people that say, why do we have to get involved in this? And what do we do if there's a restraining order? And And I'll tell you, and this is heartbreaking to me. One of the reasons I like library people so much is that most library directors are women and most library employees are women. And because of that, they have just a different empathy. I mean, I've talked to men in all professions who are like, "Eh, what do we have to deal with this for? Don't bring that crap in here. Just do your job." And that is it's the least empathic response you'd ever want to hear. And I'm like, too bad. Guess what? We have a duty of care for these people. We have a duty of care for this facility. We have a duty of care for our customers, and all these things are related. So let's get busy on this situation and stop acting like this is an irritant for you. It's a problem to be solved for everybody involved, including the person who is the victim who does not want this in their life, but they have it anyway. So anyway. Employees are entitled to a private life. It's not our intention to pry into that, but when things cross from home to work, you need to tell us. The second one is really important. If you have a restraining order against somebody, we need to know about it. If we have a human resources director, talk to the library director, we will make changes in your work environment as necessary to help enforce the order. I'm going to give you a couple specifics on that in just a second. So this is a significant issue for me, which is in my perfect world, the perfect library world, this would be something that is written policy that says to employees, you will tell us, not maybe or perhaps, or if if you think it's a good idea, you absolutely must tell us about this. We can't fix what we don't know about. When I wrote the Ticking Bombs book back in, and I'll get to our questions in just a second. When I wrote the Ticking Bombs book at the end of 93, when we were working on 94, it came out. A woman was shot and killed she worked for AAA, the auto club, and she was killed by her ex-husband, and she had a restraining order, and her family sued the auto club, and they said, why didn't you enforce the order? And they said, we didn't know it existed. So I'm saying the same thing, which is you must tell us about these particular situations. So, three issues that are critical factors for protective orders. An employee has a protective order, or a patron has a protective order against somebody. Now, we're not typically getting involved in the patron part, but for the employee, what type is it? Is it EPO, meaning emergency protective order, that has a limited shelf life? It is a temporary thing. Sometimes it may be 3 days, right? That is typically served by the cops or the deputies at jail. The cops, I put it into people's pockets as they were sitting handcuffed in my car. Here's an EPO, which we got a judge to sign, and you're now restrained from seeing this person. Is it a temporary restraining order, meaning the person is either gone to court or is going to go to court for an order which typically has a 3-year run, right? A permanent stay away, permanent restraining order, meaning that this has been served by the court and it's still valid, and the person is told to stay away for up to 3 years. Now, this varies state by state. So, has it been served? What type is it, and is it still valid? And then the one at the top there, workplace harassment order, says organizations, including libraries, and I've done many of these, can get a restraining order that says you cannot only not bother this employee in our library, you can't come onto city or county property at all if the employee is going to be there. And so sometimes the organization will get what's called a blanket or workplace violence prevention harassment order. So you can look that up as well with your city attorneys, your county council, that type of thing. So for the cops, a TRO violation is a misdemeanor, which may or may not be committed in their presence. Now, if they get there and the guy's there, they're going to arrest him for the misdemeanor violation. If they get there and the guy leaves, in some states, and you can look this up as well, they can still arrest for a TRO violation, even if the guy was not there when they got there, meaning it is stale. It's not a misdemeanor committed in their presence, but they still can. When I was in San Diego, we could arrest people for up to 48 hours if we saw the guy walking down the street for a restraining order violation. And look at the police response part here. The subject cannot violate the order with permission. She told me it was okay to come. I brought donuts and coffee. Okay, he cannot do that. She does not control the order, yes or no. The judge does. Now, she can make the order stop if they reconcile or decide she doesn't need it by going back to court. But she cannot say, yes, you can come over and we'll sit and have coffee and talk about our relationship. He cannot do that. The judge told him not to. So a couple things about restraining orders for the library. One, there is a feeling to give out this guy's picture everywhere, so all staff needs to do it. That could be an invasion of privacy concern. So photographs of this person need to go to only need to have or need to know or need to see basis, typically frontline counter staff, pics, things like that. All staff needs to be reminded individually not to gossip about this stuff and not to talk about this stuff and not to share information about our security procedures with anybody outside the library because it's a safety issue. Safety plan for the employee could include moving this person to a new branch or a safer location, changing their hours, putting them in a back office position as opposed to a front office position? And what's the safety policy if the perpetrator shows up and is threatening to people? We move people away, including the potential victim and other people and patrons, to a safe room. We call 911. Okay, these are dangerous situations that we do not let escalate. We move people out of the way and we take steps and we get the cops in route. So let's kind of go back to domestic violence, maybe some things you already know: physical domestic violence, emotional domestic violence, financial, and digital. I'm going to talk about the financial piece in a little bit of detail in just a second here. The digital part is just dramatically been made more worse by things like Apple, air tags and things like that. These perpetrators put in people's cars, and then some of these crooks, in my experience, have really, really good, for some reason, expertise in IT, which is stunning, right? They can find this person's, wherever they happen to be living. The physical, sexual abuse, physical abuse, but also the emotional abuse, harming children, harming pets is significant. And I'm going to talk to you about a cycle that involves research by this woman named Dr. Lenore Walker. So let's talk about the money part here. And the reason I have the monopoly money there was when I teach this at the police academy, which I used to do in San Diego, I'd find the burliest cop, recruit or in-service cop that I could find and say, okay, you and I are husband and wife, here's $100. You're leaving the house with our child, terrified for your life, and you're going to get in the car and drive off, and all you have is $100. You don't have any other resource besides $100, and it's 2 a.m. Because this goes back to the why can't they just leave? And the why can't they just leave part is, okay, you leave the house with $100. And then the cop says, well, I'd go to a hotel. I said, with what? You don't have any credit cards. Well, I'd get some money out of the ATM. You don't have an ATM card. He has that too. Well, I don't know. Can you get a hotel for $100? Well, maybe, but not in the safest part of town. I guess I'd sleep in my car. I go, really? You're going to sleep in your car? Yeah, because that's the only choice you have, right? And in the morning, you got to get food and diapers and maybe clothing because you left the house in sweatpants or a bathrobe and your kid needs food. And then pretty soon you drive around all day and you don't know what to do. And guess what? You have to gas up your car. And then guess what? You're out of money. And I said, no, what happens, do you think? And then the cop says, well, I guess she goes back to him. And I go, louder, please. And he says, I guess she goes back to him. And so people ask that question all the time. Why would you put, and anybody did that to me? They go back because they have control of the money. Look at the other two, right? It's not a private matter if it affects the safety of everybody else. And we have a duty of care for the people in our community when we see this stuff. Not only the 911 calls, but whatever resources, especially in the library where we have that capacity to provide resources and support. And the abuse is always physical? No, it's lots of other stuff as well, digital and financial, etc. So you may have heard about Lenore Walker's model here. There's the 4 parts in this one. Usually the shorthand for this is tension, violence, remorse. Tension, violence, remorse is there's some tension period. It could be days, weeks, months, or years. There's an acute explosive incident that the woman is abused, her kids are abused, or the pets as well. There's vandalism, property destruction. Then there's the, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I swear this will never happen again. And if it does, you can leave me. And then to reinforce that, they go into what's called the honeymoon phase. So tension, violence, remorse, the honeymoon phase is flowers and candy and baby, I love you. And then the woman thinks, this is the man I thought I married. And this is how it was when we were first dating. This is quite nice. He doesn't drink or hit me or threaten me. And then unfortunately, guess what happens? The calm period deviates into the tension building period and it starts all over again. Best case scenario, this person can get out through counseling and support. Worst case scenario, they end up dead. And so when we look at these situations here, tension, violence, remorse, these stages, and Lenore Walker, I think, came from University of Colorado. This model is 30 or 40 years old, and it still works today. So in domestic violence response, social workers, cops, prosecutors, we talk about, quote, breaking the cycle. And this is a significant reason for it because this cycle still exists. The problem is during the calm period, the honeymoon phase, this person is actually livable. And unfortunately, it starts all over again once the tension building starts, whether it's this person's, you burnt my food or you didn't give me a beer fast enough or whatever. It's not their fault. It just starts all over again with the victim's fault. It's the perpetrator's fault and they can't control themselves. So let me tell you about some of the sort of an X factor in this. It's sort of a complex factor when you are a library leader or a library staff member and you are trying to help a patron or employee who has revealed, or we find out, or through restraining order violations or police response that there is a domestic violence issue, we try to help. And here's the problem. And I've seen this model many, many times. It happened to me because I would be in the rescuer harasser mode as a cop, right? Which is I'm trying to help this person. And then when we give them advice they don't want to hear or follow, like, here's how you move to the shelter, or here, let's get you moved over to someplace safe. They don't want to do it. And then we turn into the harasser. It is really, really easy for us to be in both modes almost simultaneously. When you're telling me what I want to hear, which is support and empathy and a shoulder and advice and money. We when I was in the DV unit, we raised money for a woman who had been sexually assaulted by her husband or her boyfriend, and he had moved to another apartment, and we got money for her. We passed the hat. We got money for her. We gave her enough money to be able to move, and she moved into the apartment complex across the street. We're like, no, 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 no. You're supposed to leave the city or move to another part of, California. I mean, we gave you enough money to get away. And for some reason, she moved into the apartment complex across the street because, quote, I still love him. And we prosecuted the guy for the sexual assault, but that didn't solve the problem. So I hate to be hard-hearted here, but sometimes you have to realize when you're trying to help patrons or employees with domestic violence issues, when we tell them what they want to hear, we're being in rescuer mode, which they like. When we tell them, you got to get away from this guy, or here's a shelter to go to, or here's some, and they go, I don't want to do that stuff. I'll work it out myself. And then we're perceived in the harasser mode. And so I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it is noticeable. And so you have to work through the harasser mode. You have to say, I'm going to stay in information provider mode. I'm not here to rescue these people. They're not moving into my house, but I will be in information provider mode, regardless of whether they're in either of those two modes, rescue or harasser mode. So library employees, right? Unexplained absences, performance issues, difficulty making decisions. How about startle reflex, hypervigilance we see on the left-hand side, physical indicators. I see this a lot, wearing concealing clothing or makeup to cover bruises. Explains things away as accidents or injuries, right? Left-hand side down at the bottom, anxiety, depression, tears, hopelessness, anger, frustration, highly evolved, frustration about situation. Bottom right, the partner calls a lot, shows up, controls their transportation, drops them off, tries to isolate them from colleagues. Why do they do that? Because that could be a resource and they don't want them to talk to this person. I'm going to talk to you about a really cool way to get resources to patrons on the down low. It reminds me of one of the great interviews I did for Library 2.0, and I'll talk about that. There's a library colleague of ours that has a really cool way to help patrons, but this reminds me when I look at this for staff as well. So one of the things that we see in library work a lot, ALA has talked about this, is the trauma-informed response and talking to people carefully without judgment and confidentiality. Don't forget resources down at the bottom. One is Employee Assistance Program. There are very empathic people that work as therapists and have backgrounds in domestic violence response. Local shelters. If you look at the resources there and you see legal aid, that could be in capitalized as well. Legal aid as a concept is often provided by a lot of bar associations in counties in the United States, where their lawyers work for free, pro bono, right? Especially young lawyers, to provide legal aid about tickets and, estate planning or whatever this person wants, but they do it for free. And one of the issues that they cover is restraining orders and how to get one. So there could be, and this is a good research piece for us, which is look in your county, is there a legal aid program? Oftentimes connected either to the district attorney or prosecuting attorney's office, city attorney's office, or to the bar association. The last one there is a safety plan, right? Can we be creative about what we do? We put this person in a different location, different building, different room. We move them from front public contact to the back office. We let them work from home. Now, working from home may make the situation worse. The employee may find refuge, support and refuge working at home instead of being in the same building with the perpetrator. And when I think about this, one of the issues that was so terrifying to me, besides the people dying and the COVID, was victims being stuck in rooms, apartments, mobile homes, houses, condos with their perpetrator for days, months, weeks, on end in domestic violence relationships. And so I've written about this during the pandemic, which is, as hard as it is to get out of those situations where you're in this room with this person, you got to find a way to get out and get some help and support. You don't want to be trapped in this place for 6 months or a year or 2 years while we had the pandemic going on. So I've talked a lot about this in my patron behavior training for Library 2.0 and the live programs that I do. Code words that say, "Hey, call the police." Call Dr. Green. Police sheriffs wear green uniforms. Call Arnold, as in Schwarzenegger. Right? Make up a code word that says, "Go call 911." Left-hand side down at the bottom there, if you have a security function in your library, you need to brief those people about who may come in if there's a restraining order with photos. Be careful with how we distribute the photographs. Again, there's a confidentiality there. We don't want to get sued for invasion of privacy or something like that. Right-hand side, security escorts, parking spaces near the front, changing this person's hours. And the other part for me, and this is really significant, and jot this note if you can, we need if the person works in a back office, not at the front counter, not at the circ desk or other place, we need a visitor protocol. Hey, there's somebody to see you, and it turns out to be the ex-boyfriend. So not everybody should be able to just walk back and see who's working where in the back office areas. Now, I've said this for library leaders for a long time, which is you shouldn't be able to just walk it off the street and go confront the library director sitting at her or his desk. Same thing for physical safety, which is we don't just let people go in the back. Hey, your boyfriend's here. Oh, okay. He's not my boyfriend anymore. So in those situations, we need a definite protocol that says we do not send people into the back offices of our libraries. And all these things are significant. And I know that, they make sense to you as they do to me. So let's switch tracks a little bit here. Patrons, right? Neutral spaces, neutral safe spaces for us, a resource space, may give them access to computers that they won't have at home that the perpetrator may not see. We can get physical materials, hotline telephone numbers, shelter telephone numbers, domestic violence prosecutors. A lot of larger states have what are called victim witness advocates, and they typically work for the DA's office or the prosecuting attorney's office. And the victim witness advocates are oftentimes social workers who can respond to this issue. So 3 really big things for us: safe space, private internet access, and access to resources. So when you look at the things that we see with staff who have a domestic violence issue, perhaps that is not known to us, the same thing might be with patrons. Nervous, fearful, checking their phones, asking for information, explaining away injuries and things like that, explaining away injuries to their children. And so the issue here is we're not trying to be social workers at the library. I get it. But we're trying to say, how, as an empathic human being in a resource-filled environment, can we give help to people who may reluctantly take it or may gladly take it? We do it in a way that's careful and discreet and doesn't make the situation worse. When I was a brand new DV detective, I mean, spanking brand new, the first thing I figured out was when I called victims, I would say, hey, my name is Steve Albrecht, and I work for the PD. And is it safe to talk to you right now? Are you safe in the room that you're in for me to have a conversation with you? And they say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not. I say, okay. Can you, through some sort of coded way, tell me when it's a safe time for me to call back? And they go, yeah. Give me an estimate on fixing the drapes, tomorrow at 2:00. And I go, okay. And I call back at tomorrow at 2:00. And so the same issue with us is if we're in a room with a potential perpetrator, we don't discuss this issue. But if the patron is alone, we can say, hey, sometimes woman to woman or person to person, there's just a rapport built, an alignment about this issue. You may be able to make some careful inroads into providing support. So trauma-informed conversations here. We have resources on family law and personal safety. Can I help you with those? Can we talk privately? Speak away from other people. Don't give them physical things which the perpetrator may find, brochures and things, give them stuff which maybe they can put into their phone confidentially. And don't try to make their situation worse by giving them things that this person may have to explain back at the house. Now, if they're away from the perpetrator and they don't live with them and this person's not coming into their environment, it may be easier for us to give them resource material. So digital privacy, physical discretion. strategic placement of materials. I like the posters in the bathroom. I think, if we have unisex bathrooms, we put domestic violence posters in there. What's in there now, if you go to the airport, is human trafficking. Well, great. I'm more concerned about domestic violence because, we need every opportunity to put up stuff that's either public or private posters that people can look at, or at least copy down the information. And I got a really cool resource I want to tell you about involving one of the women I interviewed for Library 2.0. And this is her. She's one of my favorite people here. This is Molly Riportella. And Molly works at the Westwood Mass Library. She's head of adult services, but she founded, and just think how cool this is. It brings together so many things, what we're talking about. She founded a group called bibliounderground.org. And what she does is, and God love her for this, she takes old hardback books. She cuts out the inside of the hardback book to make a book safe. She puts inside the book safe phones that she gets that have been donated to her, old cell phones. And inside those cell phones are domestic violence resources. I mean, what an awesome lady, right? And the reason it's so funny to me that she says, the interview that I did with her on Library 2.0, she says, well, the perpetrator would never look in a book, right? Which is funny to me because, these guys sometimes are just the most, primitive, jerks on the entire planet. And just the idea that it would be inside of a hardback book as a book safe, she puts in there a phone which is preloaded with domestic violence information in her particular community is just so awesome. So go to Library 2.0. Click down to my part, which is the Safe Library tab. On the homepage, you'll see the programs for Safe Library. And under the program menu, go over to the right side of the screen. You'll see this yellow book interviews list there. Scroll down and you'll find my 20-minute or so interview with Molly. I did, I think, about 2 years ago on that. Listen to it. She's doing brave work. Bibliounderground.org. Take a look at that site. She takes donations. She gets, and the cool part is she uses books, hardback books that they're gonna toss out anyway. They've been seeded out anyway. So I mean, it's just a perfect use of that thing. She gets those phones in there, and it's just so clever. And I'm just so proud of the work that she has done. So a couple things. Do we have materials that could be carefully given or collected on domestic violence that we may have in a back area that we can give to people? Is it written in different languages for the people that we support in our communities? Do we do staff training about this, not only for us to help patrons, but to help coworkers support other coworkers, especially supervisors? I do a lot of work in domestic violence response by managers and supervisors to say, here's what you need to do and know. I have a whole training program on it. Portal resources, bathroom postings, integrated displays, collaborate with local DV agencies, find out who they are, right? In California, where I came from, there was Laura's House, which is a large shelter organization, Legal Aid, again, in capital letters, which is those attorneys that can provide pro bono free support especially for people, employees or patrons who want to get restraining orders. And then find out in your area, is it the PD? Is it the sheriff? When I worked in the PD in San Diego, we had a domestic violence unit, and right now it's family crimes, it's child abuse, DV, and elder abuse. And so look in your community for the law enforcement response agency. Do they have a family crimes unit? Do they have family crimes detectives? Do they have DV units? Do they have a family justice center? Do the research, find out Casey Gwinn and Gail Strack's Family Justice Center model. Again, 150 of those around the United States. And the last one, if security guards are a function in your library, talk to them about this issue, support, and not making things worse for the victim, patron, but also paying attention to perpetrator behavior. And then looking as for staff security as well, code words, safe rooms. Don't forget the run, hide, fight part. This might work for this situation as well. If these patrons come in with these perpetrators who are trying to harm them, we want to move them away from danger and get them sheltered and safe if possible. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline has been around for a really long time. The 800 number is down at the bottom, 800-799-7233. You can text to it as well. You can go to thehotline.org. So look at the right-hand side there. Libraries are uniquely positioned to save lives. That's not just a statement. That's a bold proof. We know that's true. You can help people get out of horrible, dangerous situations by carefully giving them access to resources. Small actions, privacy, resources, help with the digital part. Introducing them to groups or agencies that do this specific type work. And if I could say something about the cops, when I was in the DV unit, I worked with, I think, 16 or 17 other detectives. And these were not just, old guys sort of riding it out till they could retire. These were people that cared about their victims. I mean, people would would work on every means and tool necessary to keep a domestic violence homicide from happening. They cared. And I think that's true in a lot of law enforcement agencies where that's the point. Trauma-informed care protects patrons and staff, right? You can't get over responding. You can't over respond to these things. You don't want to under respond. You want a balanced approach. You want to take care of your own self-care in terms of stress management for these situations. And again, if you look at it, I said this all along, and I'll say it here. This is not a I issue as what do I do as a library employer, I do as a library director. It's an us issue. It's you, it's law enforcement, it's victims advocates, it's employee assistance program, it's staff, it is experts that you bring in for, lunch and learns with staff, things like that. It is you in partnership with lots of other people. It is not a you issue, it's an us issue. What do we do? Left-hand side, review your library's domestic violence resources and protocols, identify gaps in the collection, the training, the languages that you have for the materials. If you have them, you can get those from DV organizations. Connect with them, find out what you need to do. Practice trauma-informed language and approaches so that staff doesn't make situations worse and they take care of themselves. And then share resources with nearby colleagues, meaning branch to branch to branch. If you're hearing good things like the Molly Rippertellos of the world, that you can share that information with them. And when I look at it, thank you for your commitment to creating safer spaces for staff and patrons, awareness, compassion, empathy, willingness to learn, willingness to take some careful risks can make a real difference in the lives of these people. Together, we can ensure libraries remain trusted sanctuaries where everyone finds the support they need when they need it and when they desperately need it. So Steve Hargadon, back over to you. I saw some hands up and some questions for things, and I'm happy to take those. And if you have some offline situations, you can always go to Ask Dr. Steve, ASKDR Steve at Library 2.0, at library20.com, and I will take those emails as well. Steve Hargadon, back over to you.
Thanks, Dr. Steve. There are a couple of questions in the Q&A. It's hard to track the questions in the chat. So if you had a question you put in the chat, if you wouldn't mind, put it in the Q&A. There should be an icon at the bottom of your screen so we can make sure we get to it. The first was, will we get a copy of the slides? And the answer is yes. They'll get posted with the recording, which will go out sometime tomorrow. There's a link to the recording page in your confirmation email, or you can just go to library20.com and there'll be instructions there. The next question is, do you recommend mandatory reporting policies for employees who have filed a non-domestic violence related restraining order?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is it depends. I mean, I have situations where people say, I'm in this neighbor dispute. My neighbor's upset that my, leaves go into his swimming pool and there's we filed restraining orders on each other. And the answer there is probably not. But I always say the same thing. If there's a chance, and this is an open question, right? If there's a chance the perpetrator could come to the library and harm somebody, right? Either a staff member or a patron, then the answer is yes, we need to know about it. And if you're an employee and you have a restraining order where the chances this person could come, you have to tell us so we can address it. What do you know about a woman in danger sitting with her hand behind her back? I've seen a few videos on this topic. I don't know, and maybe I should, but the stuff I've seen on Twitter for this, these videos, it seems unusual to me because the hand gesture doesn't make sort of intuitive sense to me. Maybe other people have more knowledge about this. I'm not sure if it's become a universal thing or not. I mean, anything that supports that, but I'm fuzzy about the whole concept because I've just not seen sort of a national protocol on it, so I don't know, Allison. How should library administrators handle situations where they're abused or as a library employee? Oof. That's a tough one. One thing is we don't want to bring violent, threatening people into our library. That is a violation of our workplace violence policies, even if what happens is off the job. If there is police contact, they're arrested and things like that, we find out about it. I mean, we have to figure out ways to separate those people from the organization. They bring their explosiveness into the library. It's not what we want. And there's a litigation issue there, which is knew or should have known prior notice and foreseeability that this person had violent tendencies. We continue to employ them. That's a challenge. Our labor law and our HR people can help there as well. Can the information, Steve, be shared in the chat afterwards? Good tips in there, posters, resources on them, things like that.
Yeah, well, I'll have to go through because we don't tell you we're going to share the chat. We feel like it's not necessary. It's a sort of a little bit of a privacy violation to post the chat. If we haven't informed you, we're going to do so. So I will post an anonymized version of the chat, but also if you said something in the chat you don't want made public, please email me and I'll make sure it's not in there.
How can we help a patron experiencing technology abuse while visiting the library? He was hacking into our accounts. Who should we call? Yeah, I think that's a couple things. One, to get some support from your IT vendor or IT manager about what might be possible there, helping the person change their email address or getting a new email address, or putting up some blocking on their phones and things like that. IT can help there as well. One of the things I have found so disconcerting is a lot of these perpetrators are really good at electronic stalking. They find out new phone numbers, they find out new email addresses, they find out where this person's working or living. They stalk social media. They stalk this person's Facebook or web pages and things like that. So I think, what resources can we give them that maybe we get some helper support or a cheat sheet from our IT providers, whether it's a vendor or an in-house IT provider. But I'm always sort of stunned by the level of knowledge that some of these perpetrators have. I mean, I've worked on stalking cases where it's someone makes an offhand comment in a Facebook page and this person finds it and figures out where the person's living. I mean, it's just stunning what some of these perpetrators have done. So, I look at the totality of this situation. I feel hopeful with people like Casey Gwynn and Gail Strack and the Ivawa group. That's Joanne Archambault's folks, and the stuff that the National Domestic Violence Hotline is doing. And then on the other hand, I just still see this, if I can't have you, nobody else can, perpetrator as just one of the most dangerous creatures on the planet, and it's heartbreaking to me. So I think the best we can do sometimes is the best we can do, and if you go back to the rescue or harasser modality, sometimes your best intentions are not listened to by the victim, and because they are caught up in the absolute complexity and emotional complexity of these situations. I look at where we are in terms of the number of domestic violence shelters in the United States, and they're full. And this happens in homeless shelters as well. It happens in sober living facilities where people just don't have anywhere else to go. And so when there are victims there, I've seen situations where I have brought victims to domestic violence shelters with the explicit instructions not to tell the perpetrator where they are, and they do. And he comes by and causes all kinds of problems and ends up getting arrested. Are there exceptions to privacy for authorities to inform workplace of restraining order, like gun license or reoccurrences? I'm not sure. I'm sort of careful with the legal part, because the attorneys have told me that if we do things like, put this person's photograph all over the building, there's an invasion of privacy issue. So I'm not exactly sure. It probably varies state to state. Best way to approach a situation where the victim's partner, spouse is a member of law enforcement. Tons of problems in this area. Really, really significant. I think you have to figure out who this I mean, sometimes, and I'll say this freely, the cops are not very good shepherds of their own bad cops. And so there's cover-ups and things like that. I've certainly seen it. But if you need to find out who is this person's boss, and not just one step above like a sergeant, but someone who's in a command position like a captain or assistant chief, and go, I need to have a confidential conversation with you about this particular issue. If we look at it where the spouse is afraid to do so. I'll give you a parallel which happened in my career a lot. I worked in San Diego for the PD, and it's a Navy town, and so lots of women who were domestic violence victims by naval sailors were afraid to report, because he would get pulled off the ship, or he'd get put into some sort of punishment program, or he'd lose a stripe, or they'd get their pay docked, and it would not make the problem better. It makes the problem worse. So as a result, they say, well, anything that the Navy does that makes the situation worse, I'm not going to participate in it. So we really had to change we worked a lot with them to change what's called the family advocacy group about that, because they were just making things worse. What do you recommend when you witness domestic violence in the library? Tips on approaching the situation. I think you have to be a professional witness. Professional witness says, I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to take down as much, when it's safe to do so, as much information as I can, make a police report as necessary, and see whether the person who's there wants to make a police report. And if you can, carefully talk them into making a police report. I go back to the idea, no consequences for the behavior. It's going to continue. Last one about hunters, howlers. So a guy named Ted Calhoun, Calhoun, Ted Calhoun wrote a book for the United States Marshals called Hunters and Howlers. You can find that book online. It's a government publication. Howlers howl. Their function is to scare people, not hurt people. Hunters hunt. Their function is to hurt people, but not draw attention by making threats. DV perpetrators are howlers who also hunt, and that was the difference there. So thanks a lot, Steve Hargadon. Oh, one more. Recommendations about whether involved, please, for when you witness DV in the library between two people who may not be here illegally. I think the first primary concern is safety of everybody. So I think the immigration status is less of a concern for the cops because they want to make sure people aren't getting injured or killed. I would still call 911. Thanks, Steve Hargadon. Thanks, everybody. One thing to say about this program that we just did here, a lot of it was created through the wisdom and genius of Steve Hargadon using AI. And so this was one of my first AI-derived programs, and it was a lot of fun to take what AI gave me and add to it myself. And it was really fun to present it to you, even on this series subject. So I enjoyed that part. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, Dr. Steve. If you have an additional question that you didn't get to ask, you can email askdrsteve@library20.com, and he will reply to those. Sometimes they even get turned into blog posts. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dr. Steve. We'll
Thanks,
get this
folks.
posted tomorrow.
See you next time.